Hello, folks, and welcome to the Water Research Foundation's webcast on incorporating academic research into the coordinated national research strategy for water reuse. My name is Miriam Hacker. I'm one of our research program managers. I'm joined by some excellent researchers who are working with us on this amazing project for water reuse. We're going to give folks a chance to come in and join us in the webcast, but while we do that, you might see a QR code on your screen. Please feel free to use a mobile device to take the QR code, and that should take you to an interactive Slido poll, which we will be using throughout today's webcast. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we dig in today. You're able to submit questions anytime through the question box at the bottom. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We'll also have different questions asked throughout the conversation with the Slido. So if you're having problems accessing the QR code, I'll also have a number that you can use to join that as well. And if you're having issues, you can ask in the Q&A box and we'll be able to have some folks to help you out. We will also be making available the slides and the recording on our website, waterrf.org, and you're able to download the slides now. We'll have a certificate of completion that will be automatically generated after the webcast. And if you have any questions, we have the contact information for Michelle Suazo, one of our staff members that you're able to reach out to her for. We also will do a quick survey afterwards to gauge how the webcast went. And I think with that, we can go forward into the topic. So here's the trial and error here. So if you can, go ahead and click on Slido on the right side of the screen. Okay. We might have some issues with Slido today. That is not a problem. We will be fine. Let me see here. So the code, which should be able to work, is 1800750. Might take us just a minute, and thank you so much for your patience. This is actually our first time trying out Slido in a webcast, so you are part of a first. Okay. So if you don't have that information, if you go to slido.com and type in the code, I'll say it again, 1800750, you should be able to join the conversation. So I will go ahead and try this out on my screen so I can see the answers, or you can use the tab as well. So it looks like we're getting a number of folks from California. We also have some folks from Canada, New York, Texas, New Mexico, Idaho. Great to see everyone. This is just the starting point for the conversation. It should be available. So as we go through, please feel free to upload your information. It gives us a chance to engage with each other across the globe. I know we have some folks from the UK that are joining us, in Germany as well. Welcome. Perfect. All right. We've got a couple more folks responding. Yep, we got some folks from Austin, DC. Welcome. Great to have you. And know what? We're actually going to go to our next question, which is, what institution do you conduct water reuse research through? We are so excited to meet you. And part of today's webcast is going to be giving an overview of what the Water Research Foundation does. But really, we want to spend some time sharing a framework that has been getting developed about how do we think about water reuse research and how do we move forward in this space, but also getting a chance to connect with folks who are actively participating to this body of work. And so we're thrilled that you're here. We're thrilled that you're spending your time with us today, and we're excited to get to know you a little bit better. All right, Southern Nevada Water Authority, Pacific Institute, Quebec, Texas State University, let's go. We've got some fantastic folks coming in today. Great to have you in. All right, I'll leave it open just a little bit longer, but while we do that, feel free to keep adding your information. I think it should still work. So for the folks on the call, and we'll have a question in a little bit asking who has had experience working with the foundation before. So if you've heard this information, thank you for bearing with me again, but the Water Research Foundation really works to advance the science of water. Our vision is really connecting the people with the questions about water topics with the people who have the ability to answer those questions. That's simply put. You'll see on the screen here our vision as well as our mission. We are a subscriber-based foundation, which means that we've got almost 1,000 utility subscribers. We have consulting subscribers as well as manufacturing and technology vendors who subscribe to our services. And those subscriptions help enable us to conduct research, applied research across the water sector. We are considered a one water organization, which means that we work with all types of sources, including water reuse. And so we conduct work internally, we fund research, but we also partner with people to go after externally funded research as well. Really, our goal here is to collaborate and to convene and bring folks together and make sure that we can connect the information with the people who are looking for the answers. And so for today's goal, we really want to provide an introduction to the effort of how do we create a research agenda for the entire US for water reuse. We want to share this draft framework with you. We also want to get feedback from people participating today to see about the applicability of the framework. If people see themselves in the work, what are some ways that we can adjust how people are thinking about this framework? And again, the main purpose here is how do we collectively work together to advance water reuse in the US? And what's the research strategy associated with it? And I'll just make one minor note here. For those that see this circle on your screen, there is the EPA National Water Reuse Action Plan, and this is part of that WRAP action item 7.2. And so what this is a convening of different stakeholders across the sector to come together with making sure that we can advance water reuse, not only in the US, but also internationally as well. And a big thank you to our EPA partners that are on the webcast as well. So just a little bit of context here. Before we dig into what the strategy is and what the framework is, where have we come from? And so the premise of this project was the fact that there's quite a bit of research that's been done just by the Water Research Foundation. Now, of course, there are other funding agencies, there's other researchers, which is why we wanted to set up this webcast, but we know what we know and what we do. And so we have a pretty comprehensive water reuse research portfolio that's funded almost 300 projects over 30 years. And you'll see on the screen here a distribution of some of the different topics that are covered by this research, including some of the technical aspects like risk assessment, looking at resource recovery or decision-making, but also to more of the social aspects like workforce. How do you make sure that the folks that are operating and maintaining these systems are fully supported in that effort? Looking at implementation and planning, as well as others. And so taking a look at those almost 300 projects over the years, we want to set it up by the type of reuse that's been investigated. And so you see here on the screen, there's an evolving research to match the sector needs. Early in the 2000s, there was an emphasis on reuse as a whole, or just as a general topic. And you'll see the introduction of non-potable reuse in some of these dark blue boxes that increased a little bit more in the 2000s. And as you go into the later years, there's a big uptick in potable water reuse projects. There's a great need that as different communities are considering different types of reuse, our research has to adapt. And so that's where we are today. So this project did not just start a year ago. There are efforts that started back in 2019 on how do we take all this information and all this work that's been done and how do we compile it into the path forward. And so a big thank you to some of my prior colleagues. I know we had Katie Spar, as well as Erin Partland, as well as Lindsay Bluxham and Julie Minton, who aren't on the call today, who really initiated an initial compilation of the different research projects that were done, as well as a different workshop. And so you'll see here on the screen to the far left, there was a workshop done in 2022, which thought about how do we bring together all these different experts in the field to understand what are the greatest needs going forward. We also have different projects that have recently been funded, not only on just general water reuse, but emerging areas like stormwater reuse, stormwater capture and reuse, and looking at the role of AI in alternative water systems. And so in this 2022 workshop, there was actually an emphasis on 4 different areas of reuse research. One, looking at source water characterization, treatment, monitoring, implementation. And out of that workshop, there were actually 77 project ideas that were developed. 77, that's quite a number. And what we realized is that ideas are fantastic. And now how do we think about them in a holistic manner? How do we create a framework in which we can prioritize what those ideas are and how we move forward with them? And also, how do we bring together the key stakeholders that play different roles in the research process? And so in 2020, the original Water Reuse Action Plan, Action Item 7.2, was created. 2022, there was an initial workshop that was brainstorming what those great research needs are. And then this last March at the Water Reuse Symposium in Denver, Colorado, we had another workshop that really thought about what would be the different conditions that we need to consider when looking at research needs. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over after a couple of questions with the participants on this call. We created this project to finalize this framework and to really pull this all together, called Developing a Coordinated National Reuse, a national research strategy on water reuse, with our partners Eric Rosenblum, as well as Bob Rauscher and Mark Milan. And so with that, I'd like to pause and just ask a couple questions. So for the folks on here, how long have you been involved in research related to water reuse? And apologies, I know we have some folks who may not be actively involved in research projects, but are still interested. I should have left an option, so my apologies here. You are more than welcome to include how long you've been in your role or how long you've been working in the water sector. Totally understandable. We're glad to have folks involved. Great. Just want to let a few more people come and respond. So I don't know if you can see the screen, but more than 7 years is topping out the list right now, and then less than 1 year. I find that very interesting. We've got great diversity in the experience levels here, which means there's a lot of folks entering the space, as well as people that have been working on these topics for a while, and we need both. Fantastic. And I'd like to go to another question, thinking about how have you worked on a research project with the foundation before? That helps me understand where we are at as a group. Okay. So the majority so far have not, which is encouraging for me because I think we're always looking for, we know that research is happening regardless of whether or not it's through the foundation. And so finding ways to partner with folks that we haven't had the privilege of interacting with and collaborating with before is exciting. And now we're about 50-50. Okay. And so if there's questions about how to get involved with the foundation, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. We're happy to answer them, as well as those related to the framework itself. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our principal investigator, Eric Rosenblum.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I really appreciate it. And we're just delighted to be with all of you today to describe our approach to creating a research priority navigator. Now, let me explain. Originally, Bob and Mark and I were asked to create a roadmap for reuse research. Now, roadmap is a term frequently used to describe a plan for a project or a program, which includes the destination or the goal and the routes to attain them. In this case, what we needed was a plan for reuse research over the next decade or so. But the more we thought about it, it seemed that something more was called for than a plan today for research tomorrow, because the fact is, no one uses roadmaps much anymore. We use GPS, and the reason is obvious. Roadmaps show you the roads and the destinations all right, but they don't describe the features of interest along the way. And they're static. They show the routes that existed when they're printed, but they become obsolete. A navigator, by contrast, a GPS system is multidimensional. It includes information about gas stations and restrooms and restaurants, roadside attractions. And it also adjusts to the changing conditions like traffic jams and reroutes you as needed. Its logic is transparent. You know, if you ask to avoid tolls, why you're routed to a blue highway instead of an interstate. But best of all, it's continuously updated. So in this way, it actually more closely resembles the current process of identifying and funding research, which, as Miriam showed, has changed considerably over the past 30 years to match the needs of the water industry. So what we're presenting to you today is the framework for a research priority navigator, which allows users to prioritize research today and in the future, adjusting priorities to changing conditions, with the overall goal of turning research into action. After we describe this approach, we'd like to get your feedback and answer some questions. And to the extent that this format allows, we'd like to initiate a discussion with you about how it might inform your work. Now, the structure of the Research Priority Navigator is based on the theory of change, a step-by-step approach that relates actions to the change desired. So once the change, the outcome, is defined, we describe the conditions necessary for the change to occur. There may be many such conditions, and each one confronts certain obstacles that really explain why the change has not already been realized. So overcoming these obstacles requires action. The actions are facilitated, in our case, by our research. We can see the benefit of using the theory of change model better by applying it directly to water reuse. At the broadest level, the outcome of reuse is not just more reuse for its own sake, but to make recycled water available nationwide to enhance community resilience and sustainability. And this relates not just to water, but to the whole framework of sustainable utilities, water, energy, food, and of course, environmental sustainability and regeneration. Now, a little more narrowly, it may be to increase potable reuse or support the reuse of stormwater, but defining the outcome is the first step. The conditions include not only the technical challenges of making impaired water supplies usable, but also the ability to fund the projects and the regulations to support their implementation. Also, since these are public projects in the main, they require the support of elected officials and their governing bodies and acceptance by the public, who ultimately funds them. And naturally, we need to ensure that they're designed and built in a way that doesn't harm and actually improves the environment around us. So this is the ultimate structure, is to create research which supports the actions needed to overcome the obstacles that stand in the way of having the conditions needed for the outcome of making recycled water available nationwide as an integral component of sustainable water use. It might be easiest to see this if we use the example of direct potable reuse to highlight these relationships. So if you think about it, about 10 years ago, the Water Reuse Association, then operating as the Water Reuse Research Foundation, determined that one change it wanted to achieve, one outcome, was to enable the use of highly treated recycled water without a natural buffer, what we now call raw water or treated water augmentation, or DPR, direct potable reuse. Now, among the conditions required for this to occur was the need for clear and consistent regulation. But without a regulatory infrastructure, that condition could not be met. The action required was to develop an acceptable framework for risk assessment that would enable the regulators to implement DPR regulations. In fact, that is what the California State Water Resources Control Board asked for explicitly in 2018 when they identified the need to fill in the knowledge gaps to create and adopt a direct potable reuse criteria. I want to acknowledge the help of my colleague, Dr. Brian Pexon with Trussell Technologies for this slide, because one of the things that they were tasked to do as the research community responded was to create detailed studies of pathogen treatment and risk using, among other tools, QMRA, the Quantitative Microbial Risk Assessment, and also created an enhanced protocol for raw wastewater and pathogen monitoring. Now, the result of all this was that about 9 months ago or so, at the end of 2023, the State Water Resources Control Board adopted regulations for direct potable reuse. So I know this is a lot to take in a short time. I'm going to pause here. Miriam, were there any questions or comments so far that we want to address before moving on?
Yes, there's a couple of questions. That's a great point. Oh, we have 12 already. Let me see here. So some of them, the new questions we have are, we are working on the project as a startup, and how to show collaboration. So that's something we can ask in the Q&A at the end, but I don't necessarily see others right now. But we'll double check again, and I've got some great help.
I can just comment on that point because, you know, there's only so much we can sort of shoehorn into this presentation. But I will say that one of the really nice aspects of the theory of change is that it really leads to and supports transdisciplinary research. As we'll talk in just a second, in fact, I'll go on to the next slide. There are multiple inputs from individuals at different levels. And they can all share their values in defining what priority means insofar as we are relating actions to the obstacles, to the conditions, to the objectives, and even to the definition of the outcomes themselves. So let's just sort of move through some examples here, because you may be wondering at this point how all this amounts to a research priority navigator, and this table might help explain. Because the first point that we realized is we were trying to come up with some dynamic approach to identifying outcomes and adapting a system to prioritize research as those outcomes changed, was that prioritization happens at multiple levels. At the portfolio level, if you will, the funding agency decides how it wants to allocate funding among the types of reuse, as well as funding for new, maybe basic game-changing technology that could cut across all types of reuse, or collaborate with other potential funding partners that relates reuse as a whole to larger sustainability issues. That's really the responsibility of the funders, and so their perspectives come into play at the portfolio level, focusing on what is the outcome they want to achieve. At the program level, by contrast, the reuse practitioners, the utilities, the regulators, those who depend on the research, identify those conditions of greatest concern to them, where their problems are, and how research can help them resolve these issues and take action. Kind of like with the example we'll talk about in a moment with DPR. And finally, at the project level, the researchers define which research will have the greatest impact in overcoming these obstacles. So again, turning to the DPR example, it was up to the funders to decide, yes, we want to support direct potable reuse as an important and growing trend in water recycling. At the program level, the practitioners, which in this case included the regulators themselves, said, we can't do this. One of the conditions we need to accomplish this is a regulatory structure, which we don't have. And one of the barriers to that is a thorough understanding of the risk associated with DPR. That's when the researchers stepped up and said, we can do this. We will provide a framework to evaluate and perform the performance of characterize the risk and estimate the risks of infection by selected pathogens, evaluate the risks with different treatment trains, and it was their responsibility to come up which approach might be most useful and prioritize that in the overall scheme of research projects. This is shown graphically try to pull it all together and to emphasize the point that the theory of change itself does not provide a prioritization. It establishes logical and to some degree objective relationships between research, actions, obstacles, conditions, and outcomes. But the priority is only found through its reflection in the reservoir of values which come from the individuals involved, the funding organizations, the practitioners, the regulators, the research community, and even more broadly, the community stakeholders, the non-governmental organizations that all have opinions about where we should go with respect to recycled water, how it can be most effectively applied. And this is the technique that we're using to integrate these perspectives relating to the relationship between, or relating to the research as defined through the theory of change into a navigator that responds to changing conditions, that adapts to new conditions and new outcomes in order to provide a mode for prioritizing research, not just this year or next year, but on into the future. At this point, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Bob Rauscher, to talk a little bit more about what's needed in order to accomplish the research and disseminate it in a way that actually results in action. So I'm going to change slides here, and Bob, turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Eric, and good day, everyone. As Eric was saying, we rely on you as the researchers and the funders and the practitioners to work together to create this reservoir of value, this great collection of knowledge and information. But affecting change requires more than just completing good studies. We have to be able to tap into that reservoir of value and see that information, that new knowledge, get accepted and applied. And for that, we need to make sure that research is communicated effectively and in a manner, and is conducted in a manner and communicated in a manner that conveys that it is credible, meaning that it has high scientific and technical integrity, based on sound evidence and sound methods, and that that research is salient, meaning that it is relevant and usable in the context in which we need it, and that it's legitimate in terms of the process of developing the research and the findings was fair, transparent, and inclusive. And this is an interesting point when we think about how to structure research projects and who to include. We've heard examples from some of the utility practitioners about research where some of the regulators were invited to sit in on the sessions as the project unfolded, and through the inclusion of regulators in the discussions, it led to the research results being much more readily accepted and integrated into the regulatory framework, and allowed several important reuse-related projects to move forward more easily. And then, of course, it's critically important that all of the value developed in the research get communicated and disseminated in a way that's really effective, meaning it's reaching the people who we want to receive it, and it's communicated in a way that not only that they have ready access to, but communicated at a level and in a way that they can understand and trust it. So, just defining the right research projects and conducting good research only takes us part way. If we want to affect change, we need to make sure that we design and conduct the research and communicate the results in a way that can turn research into action. And with that, progressing on to the next slide and turn it back to Miriam. Oh.
Thanks, Bob. And, as we see this framework, we're going to spend a bit of time looking at the different components and really hearing from you about where do you see yourself? Where do you see the work that you've been really working with over the years? Where does it fit into these conditions or these different levels and the scales of collaboration that are needed? And so I think in terms of research, why is this important? Why should we care about this research agenda or this strategy? And there's a few main ones that I want to emphasize today. Number one is figuring out where the work that's being done is situated in the bigger picture. I know my background, civil engineering, and thinking about some of the work that I've done, you always want to do something that's meaningful, that has impact, that can affect change, or like the Water Research Foundation does, advance what we know, advance the science. It's a lot more substantial to be able to do that when you know that it's fitting into a bigger picture, where you see where it fits in the gaps or in the opportunity space for other research that's being done. Additionally, it can strengthen your justification for funding. At least in the US, there's a lot of funders who will ask about the broader impacts of your work. They'll ask about the so what. Why is this research advancing things? And a research agenda or this strategy or this navigator framework helps with that justification. Not only is it one step towards that progress, but it fits into a larger framing of how we can advance the sector as a whole. And lastly, it can be a really useful tool when you know you want to do a certain type of research and trying to identify collaborations for that project. So like Eric had mentioned, there's different scales. You might be at a project level, but who are some of the funders, or who are some of the different program level organizations that might be really influential to partner with, so that when you do have those findings, you can work with them to disseminate those results. And so those are some of the initial ideas that we have for the significance of this work and maybe where it could be beneficial to people on this webcast. But I want to turn it over to you. And I want to first start with, what do you think will help make research more effective for enhancing the broader adoption of fit-for-purpose water reuse throughout the US? And for the people that are joining us internationally, we welcome your input as well. We appreciate the fact that we've got a very diverse audience today. So, and I did see that there were a couple questions. I want to give people a chance to answer this one as well. So I'll leave the survey open. Please feel free to respond. And while you do that, I'll scroll down to our questions and answers. So there was a question. So Eric had mentioned the atmospheric water harvesting. And I think what I read in that question as well is, how do you do collaboration? Are there opportunities for collaboration when you have really exciting, innovative technology? And I think something that we can learn is that, one, there might be other people or other aspects of the work that maybe aren't covered in your research, but could be really good to partner with along the way. And I think I should be able to go back to the slide without influencing the poll. But if you're doing highly technical research on the benefit of atmospheric water harvesting, it might be worthwhile to look for other people that are looking at the economic benefits of that same type of technology, or the sustainability impact, or the governance associated with what it would take to regulate atmospheric water harvesting. In terms of collaboration with the Water Research Foundation as a whole, we have different opportunities to collaborate with folks. And what I might recommend you doing is, there should be a tab on our website that says getting involved or get involved. And some of it might be getting involved on our project advisory committees. We also do webcasts are another way to get connected. There's different webinars and workshops that we do as well to try and engage with the broader audience. I might also recommend that if you are new, we had about 50% of the people who haven't partnered with the Water Research Foundation, you're able to set up a Public Plus account to be able to access the reports on our website. So if you set up that account, that might be a good way to see what types of specific projects have been done in the area that you're working on, and seeing who those PIs are or who the research program manager are, and that might be a good person to connect with. So I think that will count as answered. And then the other one is there an angle related to social acceptance of water reuse in the research projects? And I would say that's a really great question. that's actually part of the conditions that are being considered, that public acceptance. We have a number of water reuse projects ongoing at the foundation right now, and I'm actually working with a team of people that are looking to compile best practices for community engagement around reuse projects in the US. So that's ongoing work through an EPA-funded National Priorities Grant, and it's a nationwide effort, and we're working with a lot of really talented researchers on that. I also know that our other folks on the call today, Eric and Bob, have been extensively involved in interagency collaboration and partnerships and collaboration for water reuse at a regional level as well. Eric, Bob, is there anything you'd like to say on the social acceptance part?
Not just to kind of second what you were saying, that there has been some good work. Our colleague on this project, Mark Milan, in particular, has been involved in effective communication for water reuse. What kind of terms and what kind of information is useful for helping the public understand and trust recycled water.
Thanks, Bob. So I'd like to go over into some of the responses that you had for this question. And there's some really interesting answers. We've got folks talking about stakeholder communication, utility buy-in, effective communication, flexibility with state agencies, integrated studies, incorporation of regulators. I'm seeing regulators a bit, and being able to connect that technical research to the policy and the social research. Absolutely, agreed. That integrated solutions can be really critical. How to pay for and sustain programs. There was one in here that I thought was really interesting, and it was looking at connecting it to your daily lives. So by including water reuse into a broader picture on the use of water for everyday life, where we live, how much water is available, how and why we use water, and how much. So I think you should be able to see those responses. I really appreciate people taking the time. A central database might help concentrate all eyes and ideas. Yeah, interesting. So with that, I think you should be able, taking electeds and regulators on tours, absolutely. It's interesting because I also am seeing some highly technical responses as well for PFAS and understanding risk assessment. And so it's not just the social, it's not just the technical, it's figuring out how do we work together on all of the different aspects that are really important for this issue. So the next question I'd like to ask folks is, where do you see your current water reuse work fitting into the different scales of research? And so I'll go back to that original slide. If you take a look at the portfolio level, you're thinking a little bit more about the broader outcome of advancing water reuse. Or maybe the program scale is thinking about what are the conditions, where are the obstacles, and project level might be looking at those actions and research. I'll leave it up on the screen so people can see. And then while we do that, we have another question. Feedback, looking at, we need to track the whole story of how utilities, et cetera, have implemented research in their operations, and then track the metrics used to show how operations have benefited from the change. Then you can demonstrate the value of the research. Absolutely. I think that's something that we've seen, and I know Bob and Eric, you've worked on this a bit on quantifying the value of reuse beyond just the quantitative, the economic. Anything you'd like to add there?
Well, it's been interesting, to look at how the research has affected utility operations. It's a great observation from from the audience here. Several years ago, I was involved in a project for the foundation that was where we went out to several subscribing utilities and met with people throughout the utility to understand, what research they found useful and how it had benefited the utility. So it was really very interesting to see all the different ways that what types of research and the ways in which it can influence actual practice in the field. And there were some good lessons learned about how to convey research in a manner that helps utilities understand its value and helps them implement it. So I think the foundation's done a good job with that. But that's always important. The key of getting having the research be something that can turn into action.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. And as someone a little bit newer in this space, I feel like it's been such a privilege because you come in and you get to interact with people who've been studying this for years. There is a lot that's been learned, and figuring out how you avoid reinventing the wheel and you build and complement what's already been done to move or advance progress. So that's great point, Bob. And I see the responses here. So the majority of people are at the program level. So thinking about what are the conditions, what are the obstacles, about 47, so about 50% of people are at the project level. And then others are at the portfolio level. I mean, there's some overlap here. Some folks are doing multiple things. I love that we aren't confined to just one box here. People can be involved in different aspects of the work. So the next question is, with this information, where do you see your current work situated with relation to this framework? So do you see yourself in a place where you're evaluating what the priorities are? Or have you already prioritized and now you're addressing key obstacles? If you have an example from the work that you've done, please feel free to add that in. Really, the goal here is to see how others are seeing themselves and how we can possibly think about this framework. I know we've given a lot of information right now. I know we've covered a lot of ground. So it could also just be something that's surprising, or maybe what you're focusing on right now in your research that you think might be related to what's been discussed today. Or maybe it's something surprising that you learned, or an idea that was stemmed from the conversation. Oh, you know what? Thank you, everyone. People were responding, and I did not have the screen up to see the very cool word cloud. My apologies. So it looks like a number of folks are really looking at the obstacles. Yeah, how do we overcome them? Also, the conditions, the outcomes is interesting. Emerging viruses, resilience, regulatory and funding, communicating the value of reuse. Absolutely. Research review, totally hear that. Pilot, that's great. Social change. Absolutely. I'll leave this up in case others would like to continue adding thoughts. And I just want to take a moment and see if there's additional questions. Again, I know we've presented a lot of new information to this group. I'm curious if there's any questions that haven't already been answered that we can go ahead and address. I don't see any new ones in the Q&A section, but we can go back before the end of our time together. All right. So in terms of next steps for this work, we're planning on finalizing the actual framework and report mid to late November this year. There will be a follow-up webcast that presents the final version with examples and shows people what's been pulled together. But again, the reason why we want to do today's webcast is that this is actually intended to be a living framework. It's not meant to be published, put on a shelf, and left there. It's supposed to spark and engage new ideas, create curiosity about how we approach the research that's being done, and also to be a starting point to advance water reuse research as we go forward. And so we'll probably be trying to create opportunities to share this out with others. We've been partnering with the Water Reuse Association, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, the Water Reuse Program, to think about how best to do that. And if there are ideas, I'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation. But I want to really do a last reflection of sorts with folks here to think about, where do you see this framework benefiting the research that we do for water reuse in the future? And there's a number of other projects that are ongoing at the foundation right now. So part of me is thinking we will probably need to publish some sort of blog post so that folks that are interested in the ongoing work related to these different topics have a chance to see what's going on actively at the present moment, because there's quite a few activities that we're working with. Yeah, avoid duplication. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Confidence on particularly the potable water reuse applications. So what I'm seeing in these responses right now is that people are identifying it as a potential benefit to identifying funding, reducing redundancies, prioritization, thinking about increasing confidence. So it's not just the technical advancement of the research itself, it's also thinking about implementation of projects, which is the original intention of this work. Help conquer fear with science. Well put. Yeah, more collaboration and incentives. Great. Guiding what new research should be conducted and what's priority is toward moving potable reuse forward. Absolutely. Confidence, absolutely. And I think the other question is that we were noticing in this process is that, we have these different conditions. I'll go back again. I keep going back to this slide. There's these different conditions. And if you think about the people who are looking at water reuse at a funding level, people have different priorities for what they want to fund. That might direct how they're prioritizing the research projects. And so realizing that it takes a group to do this, it's not just one or two organizations, it's really got to be a collective effort. And so how do we bring different voices into this space? This was the Water Research Foundation realizes that we have a great, robust portfolio of water reuse projects. However, we're not the only ones in this space doing the work, and we have to work together to avoid that duplication and to make sure that we're really leveraging the strengths and the impact of others in the space. Oops. There we go. Easy to point people to the scientific basis for standards that get established in regulations. Absolutely. Finding that balance between innovation and implementation. Absolutely. Thank you so much, folks, for being able to contribute your ideas. The last thing that I would like to do is I want to see if folks are comfortable or interested in staying updated on the progress of this work. Would you like to get updates? I believe I said this so that you can't see other people's responses, but if you are interested, you're welcome to include your name. And Michelle, do we have people's emails addresses if they put their names down?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, great. So feel free to put your name and then we'll find your email that you registered with if you're more comfortable with that. And then is there any other thoughts, last thoughts from Eric or Bob before we wrap up for the day?
No, none here. Appreciate everyone.
I just appreciate everyone.
Go ahead, Eric.
I just wanted to acknowledge that we have a number of academic organizations and utilities and consulting firms that have all supported this work, and we really appreciate their involvement.
Thank you. No, that's great. And I also noticed that we have some Q&A that we need to answer. So let's see. All right, there was one that was talking about the slide showing, and Eric, do you mind going to that slide with the bar chart with the projects? It says the slide showing the WRF research projects over the years is a little concerning in that it showed no non-potable reuse projects the last few years. While non-potable is a hot area, the vast majority of potential reuse lies in non-potable applications, and those applications typically don't get treated to anywhere near the extent that potable reuse does. So getting regulators on board, protecting groundwater and public health, the fate of emerging contaminants, et cetera, are all needed questions to be addressed and are desperately needed to expand reuse in most parts of the country. I would wholeheartedly agree with you. And one thing that I'll note is that just because it's not reflected on that doesn't mean that the trend is to completely remove non-potable applications. In fact, the Water Research Foundation, every 2 years, we do a research planning summit, which means that we bring together different experts in the field from utilities, industries, academia, regulators, to identify what are the key prioritizations that we need to look at for the next 2 years of funding. And I will say from the conversations I was in related to diversifying water systems and alternative water systems, that non-potable absolutely came up. It couldn't be neglected. I think in that bar chart, what you might see is that there might be more projects that are geared towards reuse as a whole. But I think that the nuance is needed is where can you find generalizability across the board and where is nuance needed for local context or for type of treatment system or application. And that's really what we're charged with when we're prioritizing these projects. So that's a great point. Anything that the others want to add?
If my bandwidth allows, can I'd like to do proposing to do here with the priority navigator is if the national capacity for reuse as defined by the EPA is in fact the outcome we want to achieve, it may be that in the majority of the country, non-potable reuse is a much more practical and available alternative as far as reusing wastewater and other impaired supplies. And so that would
and what are the conditions needed for non-potable reuse to occur in those areas. Things like distributed reuse, or sometimes called decentralized reuse. In some areas, that is really a potential growth for reuse. And so will occur at the portfolio level would be how much effort do we want to put into that, given that the outcome we want to achieve involves not just potable reuse, which may have been, as the question or as the question implies, much more trendy over the last decade, but it may have more salience to look at other options as well. That's what we hope to be able to allow for in this navigator.
Thanks, Eric. Absolutely. And the other question that I see is how to balance state level reuse research needs that may or may not align with national priorities. Different states are in such different places with reuse. And I wholeheartedly agree, even from the conversations that we've had with regulators or with even about communication. The verbiage that's used across the US is very different depending on where you are. And so I think when we think about the prioritization, I think people that are at that portfolio level, it might be something where it's trying to understand how to convene communities of practice, to understand, again, where is that generalizability that is acceptable and appropriate, and where is there local context that differs that needs to be decided locally. And so the interesting part about the US, and I know I was just in Toronto last week, is reuse isn't regulated at a federal level for our international friends that are joining us today. There's guidelines, but each state is looking to how it regulates different types of water reuse at a state level. And there's lessons that are learned across the board that doesn't necessarily mean that each state is doing exactly the same thing. And that is really where research is really critical, because at the minimum, we can have data-informed decision-making. And let me just see, I'm going to make sure that I cover all the different questions. Okay, thank you for the folks that have responded. In the last couple minutes, I want to respond to a couple of questions. How does WRF integrate its science with other research efforts from other countries? So I would actually, WRF has a number of international partners that we work with, but for this specific project, I say it goes beyond the Water Research Foundation, and I would actually move to the EPA Water Reuse Action Plan, which does have international partners as well. And so figuring out ways that folks can collaborate or do lessons learned not only across the US, but internationally has been really big. And depending on the type of project or application that you're thinking about, I know that the National Blue Ribbon Commission for On-Site Water Systems is also looking at that international scale as well. And so there's definitely efforts of bringing in experts, doing knowledge sharing and transfer. And Eric, last question. So for Eric, did we adequately assist to adding to today's conversation? How did the participants do for the work that you're doing, Eric?
Well, I'm looking at this table. The researchers are the foundation of this effort. I think my real question, and we're also eager to correspond individually with anyone who would like to participate in this framework. But I mean, ultimately, we want to come up with a structure where they can see their research in a larger picture of the National Initiative for Reuse. I mean, really, they're integral to this whole process. That's why we did this webcast.
That's the best way I could have thought to close this. Eric and Bob, thank you so much for co-presenting with me. And thank you everyone for joining us for this time together. This is a huge part of the process. It was not finalized on purpose because we wanted your feedback. And so we will stay up to date with those who provide their information. And after this, you will see a survey to be able to just give a little bit of feedback on the flow of the webcast. And we appreciate your insights. So thank you so much for joining us and have a great afternoon.